Sadness and outrage tonight after another school shooting in America.
Good afternoon, this is News 2, and we're following a breaking story today, a shooting at a high school in Littleton, Colorado.
There's word potentially multiple children have been killed. This happened at the Robb Elementary School in the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District.
2012 Colorado movie theater massacre.
7 bodies were discovered in Oklahoma.
2 mosques in Christchurch were targeted, the country's worst mass shooting ever.
On February 2nd, 2008, a 911 phone call came into the Tinley Park Police Department. On the phone was terrified Rhoda McFarland, a 42-year-old store manager at the local Bryant shop, a popular plus-size women's clothing store located in Tinley Park, Illinois, about an hour south of Chicago. Rhoda was only able to whisper the name of the store she was located in because an armed man was in earshot of her. The 911 operator also heard the supposed gunman's voice. Moments after his voice was heard, the line went dead. Police were dispatched to the store immediately after this call was placed, but a chilling mystery would ensue despite their tireless efforts. The morning of that Saturday, February 2nd, 2008, in Tinley Park, Illinois was a frigid and quiet one. The temperature outside was expected to hover in the mid-20s almost all day, with the high that afternoon coming in just below freezing. The Bryant shop opened at their normal time of 10 a.m. that day. Rhoda, the store manager, was preparing for a typical but busy and hectic shift, as the shop was planning to have a large clearance sale going on all day. Only one part-time employee was scheduled to work on that Saturday, a 33-year-old nursing student who only worked weekends. Rhoda was not actually supposed to work that day, but she knew that the lone employee would be stretched way too thin, especially with the sale happening. So she decided to come in to assist her coworker. Upon the opening of the store, 2 customers shuffled in and began browsing. Very shortly after the shop opened, a tall and husky man walked into the store and began conversations with the 4 women inside. His appearance was described as being a black man, with a handful of cornrows pulled to the back of his head. He had one braid, which ended in a handful of small green beads, hung over his right ear. Rhoda, along with the second employee, initially thought that this man was a delivery driver, and there was nothing immediately alarming about him to any of the 4 women. He was carrying a stack of papers, which furthered the idea that he was a delivery man. Rhoda started growing a little skeptical after realizing that deliveries did not typically come in on Saturdays. Just to be sure, she made a call to another Bryant shop to ask them if there were any special deliveries that were supposed to be coming that day. The other store confirmed that no deliveries were scheduled to come in. Rhoda kept her eye on this man, knowing that something nefarious might be going on. About 15 minutes after the man had entered the store, the women's fears came to life when the supposed delivery man produced a .40 caliber Glock handgun and announced that he would be robbing the store. The gunman demanded that the employees gather all of the money from the register, as well as demanding all of the cash that each woman had in their personal wallets. He also reportedly took all of the woman's visible jewelry. The 2 women working that day, Rhoda and the other unnamed part-time employee along with 2 customers in the shop, were ordered to the back of the store, where their hands and feet were bound by the self-proclaimed robber. Some sources say that he bound them with underwear found in the store, but most claim that he bound them with duct tape that he had brought with him. All 4 women were forced to lie face down on the ground, and it was at this time that the gunman reportedly groped at least one of the women. I did read that all of the women were victims of his sexual assault, but not all sources reported that. It is known that the assailant took underwear from a nearby display and put it on each woman's head, likely in an attempt to obscure their vision. The man was not masked at any time during this robbery, though, so I'm not exactly sure what the point of obscuring their vision at this time would be. As all 4 women lay on the ground, they heard the store's front door open. As expected, more customers continued to come into the shop. As 2 more women entered the store, the man rushed to ambush them as well, forcing the new customers to the back of the store. One of the women reportedly fought the attacker back and was subsequently hit in the face, most likely with the handgun, at least once, leaving her bloody and bruised. The gunman demanded them to lie face down with the other 4 women, after he also bound them. This whole ordeal unfolded in about 40 minutes, during which the assailant had slowly begun to lose his cool. At first he was calm and collected, but now he was disorganized and struggling to keep his composure. Despite this absolutely terrifying situation, Rhoda McFarland saw an opportunity. She was able to somehow loosen her restraints and proceeded to secretly dial 911 from her own cell phone at 10:44 a.m. She was able to make that call from her Bluetooth headset while the gunman was apparently distracted, and Rhoda made sure to at least tell the operator which store they were located in by whispering, "Lane Bryant, please hurry." Unfortunately, she wasn't able to give many more details to the 911 operator. The armed man was nearby, and she most likely didn't want to risk him finding out about the call. The gunman was then heard yelling, "I'm losing it!" moments before the line went dead. Many speculate that the gunman did notice that Rhoda was making this call, and that this discovery was the cause for his actions that followed. Shortly after the call dropped, the gunman opened fire on all 6 women, shooting each of them execution style in the back of their heads as they lay face down on the ground. After the 911 call was placed, police were dispatched and quickly responded to the scene. One officer, who was already extremely close by, in a Target parking lot only a few hundred feet away, was able to make it to the store within a minute or two after the call came in. The officer entered the store and began to cautiously sweep it, making sure that it was clear. As he approached the back of the store, he noticed 6 bodies on the ground, but no suspect. The gunman had apparently fled the scene right after opening fire, because there was absolutely no sign of him when the first officer arrived. Miraculously, the police officer noticed that one of the women was moving. It was the part-time employee working in the store that day. The gunman had shot her in the back of the head like he did with the 5 other victims, but thankfully she moved her head at the exact time the gun went off, so the bullet only grazed her neck, missing all vital parts of the body. She feigned death, and the assailant fled the scene before he noticed that she had not been killed. The officer called the situation into dispatch, and within minutes, numerous officers as well as first responders arrived to tend to the victims. Unfortunately, only one victim would survive, while the other 5 were pronounced dead at the scene, despite paramedics' attempts to save them. The surviving victim was sent to a local hospital where she would recover from her injuries. One of the victims, Connie Woolfolk, had blood underneath her fingernails, and the police thought that this would likely hold the DNA of the shooter, so they were sure to take samples. Tinley Park officers were joined by neighboring city and county police forces to lock down the immediate surrounding area in an attempt to quickly catch the perpetrator. They began sweeping the buildings close to the Lane Bryant shop, but quickly expanded their search further out away from the building. Witnesses recall watching as several officers moved through the surrounding businesses with their hands on their holsters, ready to come into contact with the gunman. Police set their sights on a black man sitting in his car in the nearby Target parking lot, and they apprehended him at the scene. His name was Sean Tyus, and police ended up detaining and questioning him for more than an hour. They repeatedly asked him, quote, "Where's the gun?" The officers also asked him if he had removed the beads from his hair, which Sean replied that he hadn't. Sean was ultimately cleared of any involvement in the shooting, as he had simply been sitting in the car while waiting for his girlfriend, who was shopping inside of Target at the time. In fact, the two hadn't even arrived at the location until after the shooting had already taken place. Over the next several hours, police would use a helicopter to search the area as thoroughly as they could. However, the shopping center that the Lane Bryant shop was located in was just off of Interstate 80, which meant that the killer could have fled from the scene entirely within minutes, and could possibly even be out of the state within an hour. Any searches that authorities conducted came up with absolutely no results. The gunman wouldn't be apprehended, let alone identified after this terrifying and heartbreaking crime. The FBI also joined in to assist the local police forces in catching the perpetrator. Rhoda McFarland was 42 years old at the time of her death. Born on January 10, 1966, she grew up in a relatively large family in the outskirts of Chicago. After graduating from Lyons Township High School in 1984, Rhoda went on to enlist in the U.S. Air Force, where she would be a nurse practitioner. Rhoda would eventually become ordained and join the staff as a full-time minister, but this was cut short when she got into a disagreement with the church leadership, which caused her to leave the position. After getting out of the U.S. Air Force, Rhoda returned to the Chicago area and got involved with her local church. She became the pastoral assistant, and kick-started numerous youth programs over the years. During this time, she was also helping recently released inmates integrate back into society. Later in her life, during her mid-40s, Rhoda was back in the search for a career. She worked for an energy company for a while and ended up dating and later getting engaged to a man named Stuart Gibbs. Rhoda began to look for a new temporary job and ended up applying to the Lane Bryant shop. She was hired and planned to only work there for a short time. She was offered the store manager position soon after starting and decided that she really enjoyed working at the store. According to the Chicago Tribune, Rhoda kept up her charitable side by using her store discount to purchase clothing for the less fortunate. Rhoda's brother, Maurice Hamilton, later recounted to the Chicago Tribune in the same article, quote, "Rhoda was a great person. She'd do anything for you. If you needed $1 and she only had $1, she'd give it to you without asking." The store was severely understaffed at the time, and Rhoda found herself coming into work on days that she was not even scheduled for, wanting to help her employees out. The second employee working in the store that day remains unnamed, so I wasn't able to find much information about her. But what I could find is that after the attack, she was put into protective custody and chose not to reveal her name to the public, for good reason. She was scared that the attacker might come after her again, or at the very least go after her family. The 4 customers in the shop that day were named Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Chiuso, Connie Woolfolk, and Sarah Safransky. I'm not completely sure which woman came into the store first, so the order in which I list the victims may not be the order in which they entered the shop. Jennifer was born on January 29, 1974, making her 34 years old at the time of her death. She was an extremely talented nurse who worked in the ICU. She had been working in the hospital for over a decade, having worked her way up from the bottom to being the shift supervisor. People who knew and loved her described her as being incredibly compassionate, caring, and intelligent. She had a husband named Bryant and was a devoted mother to her 3 young children, all under the age of 8. Jennifer was known to take pride in her children's projects and school activities, often lending a helping hand when they needed it. After her friends and family, her second love was for shoes and purses, which was most likely a contributing factor to why she stopped into Lane Bryant that day. She was accompanying her husband Brian, who had a work conference to attend in town. To pass time, she stopped into Lane Bryant because she had a gift card for the store that she had received for her 34th birthday, just days prior. Carrie Chiuso was a 33-year-old social worker and devoted her life to counseling teenagers at her former high school. She loved to spend one-on-one time with students that were struggling. Her career brought her immense joy and really fulfilled her desire to help people. Carrie's husband, Tony, said, quote, "From the first time I met her, it was her smile that captivated me. The two were married less than 2 years prior and were just recently beginning to talk about having kids together, planning to expand their family within the coming months." Carrie and her husband were excitedly planning for a day out together later the same day. Tony stayed at the house to finish some cleaning while Carrie headed to the bank, then to Lane Bryant, excited to shop for a new shawl to wear when she and Tony went out. I also read that she was shopping for an outfit to meet one of her former classmates the same day, so I'm not sure exactly which scenario is accurate. Connie Woolfolk was a 37-year-old single mother to 2 sons, and she worked extremely hard to provide for them. At the time, she was working overnight at the Target nearby to the Lane Bryant shop, but she had also just recently founded a mortgage business with her mother. She had great financial skills, which she used to continue their growing business. One of Connie's sons coincidentally attended the same school that the previous victim, Carrie, worked at. Her youngest son had a condition that required a lot of extra time and attention from Connie, which definitely kept her busy when she wasn't working at either of her 2 jobs. She seemed like an exceptional mother. Connie was known by her friends and family as someone who absolutely loved her family, and that she provided all that she could for them to have the best life possible. She was also known to fight for what she believed in, and for those that she cared for. It is believed that Connie was the one to fight back against the attacker. She was the one with blood underneath her fingernails, likely the blood of the shooter. Connie was planning to go out that night with a few of her friends, which was incredibly rare for her. After all, she was always extremely busy, so she normally had little to no time to go out. After getting a manicure and pedicure, her family speculates that she stopped by Lane Bryant to purchase a new outfit for the uncommon night out. Sarah Safransky was the youngest victim, just beginning her life at the time. Unfortunately, her decision to go shopping at Lane Bryant that day would end her life before it really even began. Sarah, just 22 years old at the time of her death, was the oldest of 3 siblings. Everyone that remembered Sarah described her as bubbly, loving, smart, and kind. She graduated from St. Damian's, a private Catholic school in Oak Forest. There, she would excel in multiple academic activities and organizations, such as the Academic Talented Program, Interact Club, Mathletes, Safari, and Spanish Club. As of recently, Sarah had graduated from Northern Illinois University less than a year before, and was excited for the job she had lined up at CNA Financial Corporation in Chicago. At the time, she was looking to buy winter work clothes, which is the reason that she stopped by Lane Bryant on the day of the attack. A statement was released by her family following her premature death. Quote, "Our emotions are raw, and we are still in shock. There is nothing adequate anyone can say at a time like this. Sarah was loved by all who knew her, and we are counting on that love to sustain us while we mourn." Over the next several weeks following the murders, the lone survivor spoke with investigators during numerous meetings, providing information and details to further the investigation. Her recount of the events are the only ones that exist. Therefore, her story is the only reason we know as much as we do. She wrote an open letter to the loved ones of the other shooting victims, which reads, quote, "On Saturday, February 2nd, an unspeakable tragedy occurred, and 5 of the bravest women I have ever met were senselessly murdered and taken from their families. My deepest sympathies and condolences go out to their families and friends. Please know that during the unfathomable events of that day, their thoughts were focused on you and coming home. My heart aches that they were unable to do so, and I'm working with the authorities in any way possible for all of the victims. I ask that the media please respect all of our families and allow us to grieve and cope privately with the horrific crime that ripped our worlds apart. I also ask that everyone respect that neither I nor my family can discuss the horrible events of that day. I thank everybody who has expressed concern and ask that any person who can assist in the investigation contact the authorities immediately." This shooting was and is thought to have been a robbery that went terribly wrong, because over time, this crime was deemed unlikely to be personally motivated in any way. Authorities dug into the past of each of the 6 victims to try and look for any motive someone would have had to commit a crime like this, but there was never any evidence found to suggest this. Also, none of the women reportedly seemed familiar with the unmasked shooter, and thankfully having one surviving victim allows us to know details like that. Police did find one possible connection between one of the victims and the gunman. This link led them to the church that Rhoda McFarland had once been involved with during her time in the Air Force. I'm not sure exactly what this lead was, but apparently police followed up with the church that had since moved to Texas. But this lead ended up leading nowhere, and no further investigation was done. This left the only other possible motive, which was robbery. The fact that the attacker robbed not only the store, but also each of the victims, definitely pointed to this theory. But it is also highly debated. After all, Lane Bryant wasn't exactly a cash-rich setting, as most customers would pay with debit or credit card. It also isn't a very expensive retail chain to begin with. Most of the items you could buy from this shop were pretty affordable. Also, another reason why this theory is debated is because the gunman entered the store moments after opening. It's possible that he may have thought that cash from the day before would still be in the store, but Lane Bryant made their cash deposits each night, so there was little to no cash in the register at the time of opening. Many speculate that the gunman could have been a low-life drug addict that was only looking for enough money for his next score. Maybe he was willing to do anything, including killing multiple people to earn enough money to buy his next fix. After all, the robbery didn't seem like it was orchestrated well. It took nearly an hour to pull off, and by the end of it, the attacker was struggling to keep control and organization. It's also odd that the man didn't obstruct his appearance from the beginning, but many think that if he was just a drug addict, he may not have been thinking clearly. It's also possible that his original intent wasn't to kill the women after all. Maybe he got spooked after realizing that Rhoda had made a call to the police. But if this were the case, You would think he would hide his appearance so the victims wouldn't be able to identify him later on. An unnamed source spoke with Chicago Sun-Times reporters Frank Main and Annie Sweeney in 2008. They wrote, quote, "The intent of the killer was to keep robbing people as they came into the store." So according to this unnamed source, maybe the gunman was planning to rob as many people as he could. But when he noticed that Rhoda had dialed 911, he knew the jig was up and decided just to kill everyone and flee. I'm not sure who this source is or how they could have known this information, but this most definitely could have been the plan. Unfortunately, until this gunman is caught and brought into custody, these theories and speculations are just that, and it can't be proven one way or another. Authorities conducted numerous searches in the areas surrounding the store, including forested areas, bodies of water, and trash receptacles, but no further evidence has been recovered. The gun also hasn't been located to this day, so authorities believe that the gunman took it with him and did not discard it anywhere near the crime scene. Unfortunately, Lane Bryant did not have any security cameras around the building at the time. But police were able to get a hold of security footage from the nearby Target, which thankfully captured some movement in the Lane Bryant parking lot. The footage was extremely blurry, but with the help of Dr. David Hathaway and his team at NASA, investigators were able to make out two vehicles that pulled into the lot in front of Lane Bryant. A dark sedan and a larger SUV were seen arriving at 10:39 a.m. and 10:40 a.m. Both of the cars arrived just minutes before the 911 call made from Rhoda, and left just 1 minute after the call, at 10:45 a.m. As far as I gathered, the footage didn't pick up anyone actually entering or exiting the vehicles, but it is very strange that they showed up minutes prior to the shooting and left immediately after. It is believed that at least one of these vehicles could be involved, but most likely that they both were. Theories speculate that one of the vehicles could have been the getaway car, and the other could have been a lookout or something similar. If this is the case, it's possible that this crime was actually planned out, and by multiple people at that. This scheme would have included at least 3 people, 2 drivers and the shooter. If this was the case, the question still begs, how is it that 6 women could be shot, 5 murdered, and the perpetrator was able to get away fast enough that the officer who arrived within 1 minute of the murders didn't see anything? It truly is difficult to wrap your head around how something like this could happen, and how close police would have been to catching the shooter. I'm very thankful that one of the victims ended up surviving. Without her witness statements, there would be no solid description of the attacker, or a detailed account of the events that took place that day. Even though this man hasn't been apprehended yet, the description that the victim was able to give will definitely make it more possible to catch this murderer in the future, and I am holding out hope that he will be caught someday. I'm also grateful that Rhoda was able to dial 911. Without that call, it's possible that the surviving victim may have bled out, depending on how bad her injury was. Who knows how long it would have been before authorities found the victims if they didn't receive the call. The gunman was described as being a black man with a medium complexion, who was somewhere between the ages of 25 and 35 years old. He was said to have stood anywhere from 5'9" to 6 feet tall. He was clean-shaven and described as having a husky build. He had broad shoulders, and his weight was estimated at somewhere between 200 and 230 pounds. He also had a receding hairline, with black hair that was pulled into a handful of cornrows. One of the braids hung over his right ear and ended in 4 green beads. The killer reportedly had no visible scars or tattoos, and at the time of the shooting, he was wearing a dark-colored winter coat and black jeans that had rhinestones on the back pocket, which may have been in the shape of a cursive G. Police released a composite sketch of the assailant 9 days after the shooting, with the help of the surviving victim. Unfortunately, this sketch did not bring in any new information that led to the killer. This shooting continues to be one of the only unsolved mass shootings in U.S. history. Despite all the work done by authorities, this case remains a mystery to this day. The investigation has continued over the past 15 years, and police are continuously investigating new tips and leads, refusing to label this crime a cold case. Jennifer Bishop's sister, Michelle Talos, released a message to the killer, quote, "I would really like to know why, when you took my sister away from me, and I'm sure this is the same for all the other families. You affected way more lives than just their immediate lives." Maurice, Rhoda's brother, stated, quote, You thought you were man enough to go into the store, kill 5 women and injure a 6th. Be man enough to turn yourself in. This Lane Bryant location closed permanently and lay dormant for years, until November of 2013, when another clothing retailer moved in and opened their store. Lane Bryant's parent company, Charming Shops Incorporated, put together a memorial fund. The goal of this fund was to help support the victims' families after this tragedy. Charming Shops Incorporated also initially donated $50,000 to a reward fund for any information leading to the gunman's arrest. The Cook County Crime Stoppers added $5,000 to this fund as well. Later, Charming Shops Incorporated added again to the reward fund, making it a total of $100,000, which still stands to this day. 2 women who also worked at the Tinley Park Lane Bryant location later came out and gave their recount of the day. Lori and Laura were cousins who both worked part-time at the store. Lori said, quote, "I called the store on Friday and said I wouldn't be able to come in Saturday." Lori was unable to go into work that day because her 13-year-old son was undergoing surgery. While waiting in the hospital, Lori first heard of the shooting on the news. Lori recalls how she found out about the murders. Quote, "I see on the TV, Lane Bryant killing. And I'm like, Lane Bryant? I work there." And I'm telling the nurses, "Oh my God, I work at Lane Bryant." Cell service inside of the hospital wasn't dependable, but eventually a rush of concerned voice messages started to flood into Lori's phone when she did finally gain service. Several messages from scared friends and family rushed in, asking her to pick up her phone. Lori's cousin Laura was also receiving numerous messages from friends and family as she was at a hair appointment. Luckily, these 2 women were okay, but they both grieved for their co-workers. They both reportedly had fond memories of the store manager, Rhoda. She was probably one of the most caring, giving, selfless managers I've ever worked for, Lori said. They both also described her as a sweetheart. Laura said, quote, "Once they said who was in the store, all I could do was break down and cry because I couldn't believe it. It's been 15 years since this tragedy took place, and there are still no answers for the people affected. If you think you may have any information regarding this case, please call the tip line number on the screen, or send the tip to the email on the screen. You can also anonymously call in any information to Cook County Crime Stoppers at the number shown on screen. I really hope that one day, the families of each of the victims are able to get the peace they deserve in knowing that their loved one's killer is caught and brought to justice. Until then, I hope that they are able to somehow cope with their tremendous and sudden loss. Please keep the victims and their loved ones in your thoughts. None of the people affected by this senseless act of violence deserved what happened to them that day. Nothing can be done to bring the victims back or erase the pain caused by this attack, but I'm hopeful that someday they will get the justice they deserve. Thank you for tuning into this video. I appreciate all of the support I have been receiving so far. I hope to see you on the next one, but until then, have a great one and stay safe.